Hello and welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. As we've said before, offshore outsourcing is a segment of many Caribbean economies that some people just love to hate. However, the business process outsourcing segment, BPO, of the wider outsourcing market was valued at around $221 billion in 2019 and is expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of around 8% between now and 2027. How COVID might affect that, I guess, is yet to be seen, but at least there is still robust growth projected. Further, and during the prolonged lockdowns experienced in many popular destinations, outsourcing locations globally, the Caribbean BPO business, at least in some countries such as Jamaica, was surprisingly resilient. And it could be argued that such results may intensify the Caribbean region's focus on offshore outsourcing, especially since the tourism and hospitality industries are unlikely to bounce back to pre-COVID levels for some time. Hence, as 2020 begins to wind down, we are taking a look back at the Caribbean offshore outsourcing space, whilst also discussing trends and strategies that Caribbean countries could consider employing to better position themselves for the future. Joining us today, we are delighted to have Kirk Laughlin, who needs no introduction in the Latin America and Caribbean outsourcing space. Kirk is the managing director of Nearshore Americas, a well-regarded and influential online publication that focuses on knowledge services in the Americas, so North, South, Central America, as well as the Caribbean region. Kirk is also the founder of Nearshore Nexus, the leading conference for the nearshore services industry. Kirk, welcome to the podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here, Michelle. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you just so much for joining me today. So, Kirk, 2020 has been quite a year. And, how has the Caribbean and Latin American outsourcing industry fared so far?
Well, Michelle, the good news is it's been, the industry itself has been very resilient. We've seen, obviously, all of us have seen a serious challenge faced by the results of the COVID pandemic. And this obviously forced a huge migration to work from home. The reports have generally been very positive in terms of the skillfulness of the providers in this space to transition their workers to home environments. Obviously, the space near and dear to your heart, the ICT infrastructure question and the quality of service of those telecommunications services are central to the success of that transition. And clearly, it's not a perfect story. There are areas of challenge that organizations have faced, but by and large, when you look at it globally, the nearshore region and Caribbean have done quite well. A related point, of course, in terms of the overall performance is the fact that there's no question that the pandemic put a great deal of pressure on the Asia Pacific outsourcing services sector, particularly in the Philippines and to a lesser degree in India. And it's quite clear, as some of the dust has settled, that there was some real problems and some real challenges the Philippine system faced, which resulted in a lot of organizations, both the clients themselves as well as service providers, beginning a conversation around de-risking from the Asia Pacific region. There's no question the net benefactor of that analysis has been the Americas. We tend to believe and continue to see evidence that organizations based in the U.S., for whatever reason, may not have fully grasped the tremendous value of similar time zones and also culture of familiarity, which have always been longstanding pillars of the nearshore model. But by and large, we have seen good results throughout the Caribbean, and I think there's a lot of optimism going into the new year.
Fantastic. And one of the things it actually I think came out in a conversation I had with Yoni earlier this year, just to sort of add to what might be the value proposition for the region, although we may not think about it like that, because in the Philippines and India, where you have, a center could have, 5,000 people, and the footprint in the country could be 20,000, 25,000, whereas clearly we as Caribbean islands cannot sustain those kinds of numbers. But maybe in having smaller footprints and being able to have business, let's say, across the region, you're not put in a situation where, for all intents and purposes, you have all your eggs in one basket. Uh,
Right.
yeah, so that I think is, at least certainly something that the region could add in terms of, its unique selling points and value proposition going forward, because that I think is all part of the whole de-risking element as well.
No, it's very true, Michelle. I think the word that comes to mind is agility
Hmm.
and being nimble, and those are incredibly important features right now to be able to lift and shift, to move resources where they need to go, to realign the distribution of the workforce to the needs of a client. Uh, Obviously, the numbers do play a part in that, but we have seen generally that is one of the things that continues to come up in terms of the perception of the value of nearshore, and having that adaptability element is crucial.
Right, right, right. Interesting. Yeah, because yeah, I think that a lot of companies probably consider outsourcing based on, well, at least certainly traditionally, the cost savings that could be realized, and oftentimes the cost savings come from having a certain amount of scale, but in doing so you lose agility as well, at least up to a point. So I think that's such a valid point that you're making.
Hmm.
Okay, so I guess just now looking at Caribbean countries and how they position themselves, there now seem to be even greater opportunities for the region based on some of the challenges that have emerged and become evident during COVID-19, and at least maybe with us for at least a little while longer. And I was wondering whether or not the whole focus on call centers by Caribbean countries, and the fact that many of them have built their investment promotion strategies around call center because, voice and English speaking and proximity to the Americas. Do you think that's still a good idea?
Um, Michelle, I have concerns about putting all of the focus in that direction. And let me just back up by saying I'm not necessarily saying that the trade promotion agencies are putting all their eggs, but there's no question that the concentration of their effort continues to be in the call center, contact center space
Mm-hmm.
now. And I know we'll get into this a little bit more. The way in which those organizations behave is different and continues to evolve in the direction of digital non-voice type services. But by and large, I do believe that continues to be perceived as low-hanging fruit. And I don't necessarily want to argue with that point. I do think that there are a lot of quick wins and a certain lucrativeness to pursuing that space. But I do think that there are other areas that need to be looked at more seriously. And that goes back to the longstanding question about moving up the value chain.
Mm-hmm.
The value chain itself continues to evolve. It's not the same thing it was 4 or 5 years ago. But by and large, I do think there's more opportunity out there beyond the traditional contact center.
Absolutely. And boy, you have given me and generated quite a few questions for me. But the first one, just talking about this contact center, the voice space, and I think that certainly it's low hanging fruit for a number of countries, but you also have a situation where I question the extent to which Caribbean countries generally are competitive in that space, especially when oftentimes price tends to be a key decision point or decision factor. What are your thoughts? Because here it is that One might be, yes, looking at building or keeping your investment promotion strategy primarily around call centers, but what is happening in this space in terms of the extent to which Caribbean countries, especially maybe some of the smaller ones that do not already have established industries, can attract that business going forward?
Well, if I understand your question, I'm not seeing as cost being a reason to feel that one needs to go elsewhere. I think everything I've seen indicates that the Caribbean continues to be a very economically attractive region for the BPO industry. I don't think that has changed. And in terms of, the kind of the question of whether or not a country has the proper levels of maturity or whether they've evolved, I like to think about the example that we've seen in St. Lucia, which, frankly, it's a great story to see the kind of seriousness Invest St. Lucia has undertaken to go out and commit across multiple years now. That they take the BPO opportunity very seriously, and lo and behold, we see some tremendous results for the team at Invest St. Lucia as a result of that seriousness. So I think that's a great example. You have, as you mentioned, some of the smaller countries. Well, that's an example we all need to celebrate because that's a small country with a comparatively limited population that still recognizes we have a lot of great talent. We have people looking to work, and the results, as you know, especially in View Forward, have been really tremendous.
And I mean, one could say, even in the throes of a pandemic, I mean, yes, the arrangements would have been made beforehand, but the fact that the center actually opened, I think it was June, July, ITEL BPO
That's
set it,
right.
yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And just for clarification, you also had this Ojo Labs organization open, about probably two or 3 years ago now, which preceded Yanni's organization, also doing very well down there.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, certainly, good news and really something I think that many of the smaller countries in particular can point to as, a way that they can probably try and realize similar results.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And I know I'm taking a risk here by overemphasizing it, but it's so crucial, Michelle, to think about this business as a long-term conversation, a long-term strategy. And I know people who've heard me speak before, probably tired of me mentioning it, but I think that the example that many countries need to be considering is looking at what a country like Costa Rica has done with support from a group called CINDE. CINDE is the trade promotion agency for the Costa Rica, which is actually privately supported. It's not supported by government funding, by the way. But they looked at this opportunity across many, many years, and they've been at it for many, many years. And that's the sort of long-term commitment which is necessary instead of looking at it, okay, well, this year we're going to go after a few call centers, or we're going to go to a few call center events, or, we're going to put out a few social media campaigns. It's much more, the successful countries in this space take it much more seriously in terms of real market analysis, applying some rigor to understanding the direction of the space, and getting really deep into the weeds. And I think that's probably the challenge that the Caribbean faces is collectively, if the region, came together in a very robust, serious way to undertake that kind of analysis, I think great results would happen for the entire region. But that's a big if, as we all know. And, there's lots of different forces and lots of different special interests and interests in one individual country that make it very difficult to think collectively.
Yes.
But that could be one of the ways to bring scale to the kind of effort that's necessary to really understand the market at a deeper level, understand the opportunity at a deeper level, and then pivot and take that knowledge to go after the kinds of organizations that need to be notified of the opportunity.
Indeed. Indeed. And also, you had mentioned about the value chain. And, again, countries talk about, wanting to go up the value chain. And do you think that's a good idea? And how might they begin to do so?
I think it's a fabulous idea, Michelle. I really do. But it's one thing to say you're going to do it, and another thing to actually do the hard work that it takes to go up the value chain. So if you understand that point, I think it at a political level or a ministerial level, a policy level, that sounds really good. But where I sit, I'm in the trenches of commerce and the commercial realities. And when we get approached by investors about certain markets or certain opportunities in the Caribbean region, I would love to be able to point them to a robust, sort of market research report or something truly exhaustive that uncovers some of the really valuable assets of the Caribbean. But there's very little of that, as you know.
Yes, yes.
And without that kind of seriousness, I mean, I don't know if you saw, we just put out a piece on what South Africa has been able to do in BPO. Immediately, people will say, well, that's an unfair comparison. I understand it's a big market, it's a lot of population. But in the case of South Africa, that country has taken it very seriously, and they've worked with a lot of different outside organizations to be able to try to expose how serious the opportunity is. And I think that if the options are, well, we're just going to continue to try to go after low hanging fruit and sort of talk about going up the value chain, but not really embarking on it in a serious way. That I think that's kind of how things get stuck in the Caribbean, and that's unfortunate because I continue to think that there's a lot of opportunity out there for these countries.
Indeed. Indeed. And in terms of the whole conversation of going up the value chain, some of the areas that I think are, that are mentioned quite regularly tend to be like finance and accounting and even shared services. But as you're saying, and I mean, even just my own observations, very little inroads have actually been made in those areas. And I do take the point that perhaps the market research that needs to be done to probably really present what might be the value proposition has not been done. But do you think that, F&A in particular, and even shared services are areas that the region ought to focus on?
I am not as excited by those areas as I am around what I would describe as the financial technology revolution, aka Fintech. This is part of a really exciting transformation of the way banking and finance is handled and interacting with consumers, and including, online banking and all of the unique permutations of what Fintech means. It's a very exciting field. There's many, many different components to it. Things like blockchain and artificial intelligence play a huge role. There's something like 12,000 fintech startups globally. Many of those organizations have unique needs across the spectrum of services, from digital software development, technology requirements. Certainly bleeds into customer experience and interacting with the consumers online, providing secure relationships, meeting compliance requirements. It goes on and on and on and on. I would like to see the Caribbean begin to embrace and understand that opportunity to a much deeper level. It's not to say that shared services aren't important. I do think with COVID and what we're learning about this year, it does make you begin to wonder if site selectors and organizations are still thinking about housing hundreds of individuals in a office space somewhere, wherever it might be, in an offshore environment, or will there be a different sort of calculation around locating those kinds of resources? I think we have a lot more to learn in that conversation as organizations redefine what remote work means. But so I don't know the final word on things like shared services centers. Finance and accounting is certainly continues to be an interesting opportunity. We've seen some good results in places like Trinidad about putting some attention there, but it just, as I said earlier, it's putting the effort in market analysis into getting the deep industry level understanding of the direction of those markets.
Indeed. But with finance and accounting, for example, one of the challenges that probably has occurred, which has caused that segment to evolve, is the impact of like automation and artificial intelligence on some of the tasks, especially probably the lower skill tasks. What are your thoughts therefore, if, for example, the region may still want to focus on it because supposedly we have, a lot of people coming out with like either accounting degrees or working or studying accounts and finance. What has been your perception of the impact of RPA and artificial intelligence on that segment, and probably where then should the region probably put their attention?
Well, I think we've all grown to understand that it's gross oversimplification to say those trends will eliminate jobs. That's really no longer the consideration. I think we've all learned that over the last couple of years. What insight has been gained is that, okay, now we understand that we're in a wave of requirement of specialized skills. So having specialists who can work in discrete areas of the finance and accounting, area, applying some of the skill sets around robotics process automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of these more specialized skill sets are definitely part of this trend. So why is that important, Michelle? Because when a country or a cluster or an industry body in the Caribbean is trying to demonstrate its value, it must have taken the time to be articulate the understanding of those particular needs and why it is important that skill sets have been developed to meet those needs. And so what I guess I'm saying is, it's really not enough to say, yeah, come to us with your finance and accounting requirements. We can do it all. That sort of just is the beginning of the conversation. I think what we would like to see, whether at a country level or again a regional level, is industry bodies that say, look, we're watching very closely. We understand the pressures you're under. We understand, for example, data scientists. There's a real demand for that kind of skill set, and undertaking the time to look at the presence of the kind of skill sets that are necessary across the region, as well as, one of the interesting examples I find. I prefer not to name the company directly, but there's some very interesting things going on right now in the Caribbean with bringing folks in from outside the country, in some cases outside of the Americas, to go work and live in obviously incredibly attractive environments, and beginning to see a different wave in which people are willing to migrate to new locations to do work. This is one of the areas, we haven't come up with a fancy name for it, but it's something around, flex work or near flexing or something around a line of using the Caribbean, bringing resources in and developing centers of excellence that meet some of these demand areas. So in the area of data science, no question, we see a lot of demand there.
Okay, so I guess one is saying though that perhaps the region may not be awash with data sciences, for example, but one could then look at saying, come to the Caribbean, we have, besides, wonderful weather, great infrastructure, and locate some a company can seek to locate some data scientists here. Something like that. That's what you're suggesting?
Yeah, that is one element for sure. That for sure. And we this is a very early stage of this kind of trend, so it's a little bit ahead of me talking about. It's a little bit ahead of what we can report on.
Mm-hmm.
But we've been seeing examples of this in other parts of the Americas. Just a quick point to that. There's a group in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, that is now setting up a situation where they're trying to attract for anywhere from 4 to 6 months a year Canadian-based IT organizations whose workforce would love to get out of the cold and discomfort of the Canadian winter and work in a place like Puerto Vallarta. And this offer includes not just living accommodations, condominium type thing, but also workspace. And I think it is part of a trend of beginning to redefine what it is we perceive as remote work and where the work gets done, and having flexible models. And I think that is something the Caribbean could capitalize on over time.
Indeed. And it almost looks as if it's a progression of the whole sort of digital nomad excitement
Exactly.
that has hit the region recently.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay. And just since we're talking about data scientists and skills and so on, what type of skills do you think would be required in the region to serve the outsourcing sector probably in the next 5 to 7 years?
Well, I would, at a high level, Michelle, I really am encouraged when I see startups in the Caribbean landing and creating themselves in what you would consider to be a digitally focused direction. So I don't have the name of the company off the top of my head, but I just noticed the other day in Jamaica, there's a new software-oriented next generation technology solutions company just getting rolling. I think they already have as many as 20 employees. That's a really good sign. There's another exciting entrepreneur we know, Stacy Kirk out of Jamaica,
Yes.
who runs an exciting organization. Those kinds of organizations, I think, are crucial, and I think the region needs to really appreciate and support entrepreneurs who are willing to go in that direction with support, resources, guidance, sort of an incubation phase, if you will. I don't think central to our interest at Nearshore Americas is to create bridges, especially bridges between the developed economy of the United States and other parts of the Americas. And we continue to not see enough time spent on building those bridges between nations. So often we see that countries get very busy internally, and they have their internal conversations, internal dialogues, endless meetings that are all in isolation, and they're not spending enough time getting the perspective from outside their own country or outside their own region. We are in touch with literally thousands of individuals, tens of thousands of individuals in the United States and Canada who have great fondness for the Caribbean and Latin America. They're interested in conversations and offering insights and offering guidance. I feel like, Michelle, that's just a huge opportunity that has not been tapped effectively. There are lots of people who don't need to be sold to. They're not looking to directly be investors, but they certainly have a lot of guidance to offer. And I think in the formation of this next generation Caribbean, digital technology revolution, if you call it, whatever direction it takes, I think it'll be much more formidable if there's genuine effort made to understand the global demands and the global, guidance that's available out there.
Indeed. But Kirk, what are the things, at least certainly from the investment promotion strategies that many, at least let's say Caribbean countries have been employing, I guess, to varying degrees and to varying degrees of success, is, for example, attending trade shows where you get to meet people and those sort of industry for events. And we are, at least for now, one may find that travel and so on, in-person meetings might be quite limited, at least maybe until well into next year. But how then do we tap into and get access to these individuals who, as you say, may not necessarily need to be sold to? They already have an affinity for the region, but at least to be able to begin to have a conversation and to begin to build those relationships. How can we do so?
Well, yeah, I find this to be a really interesting conversation, Michelle, because, and let me just take you back, and this may seem a little bit out of the blue, but one of the things that on my very first trip to Jamaica, this is going back 10 or 11 years ago, we visited Mark Hard Jarrett and got to see the exciting things that were going on in the Barnett Tech Park. And then we spent some time in Kingston, and we actually went to the streets of Kingston and did a really interesting video series on the digital savviness of Jamaicans. And I was personally blown away by the not just digital savviness, but just like this creative force that exists in Jamaica, but I think without question throughout the Caribbean and amazing countries like Haiti. And I think it's that sense of creativity and sense of imagination that needs to be brought into the conversation of how do we begin to build those kinds of alliances? How do we use our imagination and recognize the individuals, institutions, partners, business alliances? There are so many of people out in this part of the world, in the United States where I am, who are very, very excited by the Caribbean, want to see great things happen. And I think that just there hasn't been a sincere effort. And whether this takes a more formalized approach of advisory boards or unofficial groups of people who provide input or have focus groups or any of those things, I think are part of the how question you're asking. I don't believe that enough thought has gone into recognizing the kinds of support that could be out there beyond the borders of the Caribbean.
Understood. But one of the things that also came through what you're saying to me is that, at least from an investment promotion perspective from the Caribbean region itself, and probably by individual countries, is that the story probably is not big enough, in the sense that, okay, you talk about what might be the value proposition, why why the country is attractive, what are the incentives we're offering, but I guess there is more that could be shared in terms of, from what you're saying, even like the ingenuity of the people, maybe, to show what some of the things that are happening on the ground, so that even though, yes, you might be looking at somebody to come and set up an operation in Jamaica or in, St. Lucia or Barbados, that I think people get a greater insight into what might be possible, and I guess just increase their excitement and willingness to probably at least dip their toe in some way.
Right. I mean, I think the beginning of your question, Michelle, you mentioned, I don't know if you're hitting on the concern of scale there, but yeah, yes, I agree exactly with what you're saying. I mean, continuing to get people closer to the opportunity is what it sometimes takes. So, I've been witness to the vision of individuals like Bob Deckett at IBEX, who once he became CEO, I think it was 4 years ago, more or less, he was incredibly focused on and aware of how much opportunity existed in Jamaica. I mean, there was no question that he had a very, very big vision.
Mm-hmm.
And why did that happen? It's because he had enough industry awareness and had gotten close enough to the conversation to realize, wow, there's great upside here. Another great example is David Rubin. I believe that's his name, David Rubin, from Ojo Labs, co-founder of Ojo Labs. He had a previous understanding of St. Lucia, loved the country, loved the people, and now has, I think it's a couple hundred workers in View Fort. These things have come about because they themselves have taken the time and developed industry awareness that that's always potentially going to happen, but having enough inroads and enough access points for those kinds of visionaries and to be able to support those visions, I think is a key part of what the investment agencies are there to do.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're beginning to wind down the conversation, and I mean, yes, we could I could probably just delve in and mine some of those points you're making, but at least I think we have so much more that we need to sort of touch on within the time that we have. And I think just you've spoken about fintech probably being an area that you seem to be quite excited about, and an area that perhaps the Caribbean could focus on in terms of opportunities. Are there any others that you would suggest that the region could also give some attention?
Well, I think across the board, Michelle, you go into retail or healthcare or e-government or even some of the industrial sectors, and every single one of them is grinding or going in not so grinding ways, but having to confront the realities of digital transformation and the fact that their customer base, their partner base, the value chain of doing business in today's society requires a sophisticated understanding of how to reach these people across different channels and how to market to them and how to transact business. So I believe that the opportunity is broad. I like fintech because it's quite tangible, and I think it's given where the Caribbean sits in terms of its savviness already with finance and banking, it seems to be a logical fit to some degree. But I think there's broad opportunity throughout the industries that we see, and also some of these organizations that are software as a service based. They're also requiring a lot of new partnerships and opportunities outside of the United States.
Understood. As you were talking, though, something came to mind for me, and that is the extent to which I'll say it like this: bespoke solutions. Because I think sometimes when at least I think of outsourcing, and I guess yes, you see, the rows of cubicles and so on, but I'm wondering whether or not there may be a need now to craft solutions for clients that really address the pain points that they have, which may not necessarily be as common anymore. And even though there might be commonalities, I guess the uniqueness of some of the challenges may need to be considered and accommodated in what the service providers are offering. What are your thoughts? I mean, is there any truth to that?
Could you restate that question, Michelle? I'm not sure if I totally understand it.
Okay, when you're talking, and I guess looking at just the various industries and the verticals that probably one could consider, and probably where the opportunities lie, I wondered whether or not there may be a need by the service providers to provide more customized solutions to their clients.
Yeah.
There can be a sense though that, they're in outsourcing and probably maybe looking at what might occur in, like, let's say, the call center space. There is a lot of commonalities, and therefore this is how you were able to scale, this is how you were able
Right.
to,
Right.
and therefore now, I'm just wondering whether or not there needs to be probably more emphasis on really addressing the needs of your individual clients.
Mhm.
So yes, there might be commonalities, but really the value is in really addressing their pain points and their
Right.
challenges.
No, we've definitely noticed that over recent years that there is a greater degree of customization. I think it's not necessarily new, especially in the BPO industry. These clients come with their own view of the world and their own requirements, and even in some cases, they don't want their service provider partner to be doing business in the same building as a competitor, and all kinds of unique requirements in that direction. But I think, to your point, I have to say that in my conversations with a lot of investment promotion agency folks, they're very aware of this fact as well. And I think that kind of customization thinking applies to the soft landing process and making the appropriate accommodations to suit that type of conversation. And talking about this at a high level, I think it just is another demonstration of why this is such an important type of industry to attract. These are very, significant financial investments by these companies in many cases, and they're making commitments to countries that are intended to create jobs for a very long time. And I think the societies across the Caribbean, it's sort of a mixed bag. Some people still have this sort of dark ages view on call centers being a low reward sort of boiler room operation, and it really is not reflective at all as to the reality of, it is migrating up a value chain. The contact center itself is changing. The nature of the service is changing. And I think all of these things point to a great upside. And I just think that a greater amount of support in those societies will encourage folks to realize that this is something that countries have a good reason to go after.
Indeed. And granted that we've been focusing on opportunities, but what might be some of the threats that the region ought to consider in positioning itself for the future?
Yeah. Well, I sometimes wonder, Michelle, if and I don't know the answer to this question, so I'm not sure if it's an outright threat or not, but I think it does require closer analysis. The question would be, is the work from home concept a sustainable concept for a longer period? A lot of people are talking about, permanent remote work situations where as many as, 50%, 60% of a workforce where they would have been working out of a building are now going to work from home. I think that presents a lot of interesting questions, most notably, of course, the stability of the internet, fixed line infrastructure, the accommodations that are necessary at homes to support that long-term approach, the psychological impact of isolation. I think that's not spoken about enough. We've done some reporting on that. There's even reporting we've had recently on the challenges in being creative in heavy isolation work environments. So I think those are interesting things to probe for. But I think, one of the threats that we may have thought might be significant that that continues to always be volleyed around during any presidential political cycle or the months and years after a new president arrives, as the possibility of harsh penalties for organizations that do work in so-called offshore environments. You could still chalk it up to a potential threat, but nothing ever really seems to change in that area. And I think, when the U.S. economy is managing to do well, we continue to see great opportunity for nearshore. I suppose if there's a big economic downturn or some really harsh, waves of the pandemic, for sure, we might see some pain in the nearer term.
Indeed. And I think just my final question. So what do you think is the future of outsourcing? What might that future look like?
Do you mean it like broadly or specific to the Caribbean?
Well, you probably talk broadly and then maybe hone down to the Caribbean, please.
So not surprising, Michelle, have a very robust view on the future of outsourcing. I think organizations, no matter what level they are, even the big ones as well as small organizations trying to find their way forward, it makes way too much sense to use a third party to take care of certain specialized functions of my business. If I can run in a more efficient way and depend on a partner to manage specific areas of my business, and I can perform better overall, it's a no-brainer. And I think the data will show that will continue to be a trend, especially when companies struggle to move quickly. I think market forces require companies to be agile, to be quick, and having partners to support that level of speed is crucial. As far as the Caribbean goes, nearshore in general, as well as the Caribbean, as I mentioned at the top of the call, we're seeing a real significant wave of business decision makers taking a much closer view into the nearshore opportunity than many for the very first time. And we're projecting at least 50,000, probably far more, but at minimum 50,000 positions moving specifically from the Philippines to the Americas by the end of next year. We've already seen upwards of 15 to 20,000 positions easily move into the region, and there will be a lot more. And there's a lot of forces behind that, as I mentioned earlier. But overall, we see a really strong upside for the foreseeable future.
What a wonderful and positive note to end on. So, Kirk, just thank you so much. This has just been a very, invigorating conversation for me, because I think that it is probably certainly one of the bright points in terms of Caribbean economies currently, and just the fact that I think that, as you had indicated, and even myself at the top of the call, where I think it has been, the sort of bastard child for in many people's minds, something less than, but it is such a crucial area. And as you rightfully said, I think businesses, as one strives to become more efficient with, your one's time, resources, and money, outsourcing, I think, becomes a very important conversation and an option for so many businesses, even here in the region. So just thank you so much for joining us today, and really for, I think, helping myself, but also I hopefully think the listeners and hopefully policymakers will be among them, to see what might be possible where outsourcing is concerned within the region, and how best they might be able to position themselves and position our countries for that future.
Well, Michelle, it's wonderful to be speaking with you today, and I really admire the work you're doing. Thank you very much.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.